The beginning of this week's Parsha starts off really as a continuation from a story that happens right at the end of last week's Parsha. At the end of last week's Parsha, the Torah tells us about a terrible sin that was performed by Cozbi and Zimri, and Pinchas came along and he took a spear and he killed these two people. He killed Cozbi and Zimri. That's what happens at the end of last week's Parsha. In this week's Parsha, the Torah tells us that Hashem gave a reward to Pinchas. What's the reward he gave to Pinchas? He gave him Brisi Shalom, my covenant of peace. It's a very strange thing. The act that Pinchas performed here, while we can assume that it was appropriate, however, it seems like a very violent act. Why is the Torah giving Pinchas Brisi Shalom, my covenant of peace? We can give him a reward for his bravery. We can give him a reward for his honor. We can give him a reward for the act that he did. But why are we giving him Brisi Shalom? Why is Hashem giving Pinchas a covenant of peace? It doesn't seem like the act that he did was an act of peace, just the opposite. It seems like the act he did was a, albeit appropriate act, but an act of violence. And I think you learn a very important lesson from here. And that is that sometimes and often the way we can accomplish peace is through peaceful measures. The way we can accomplish peace is by talking and coming to an agreement and to work things out. But Pinchas came across a situation where that was not possible. Two people were performing a terrible sin, a sin that was made to anger God. These two people were trying to rebel against God, and therefore to bring peace between the Jewish people and our Father in heaven required an act of violence. And the Torah is telling us that that act of violence was itself an act of peace. The Torah points out that Pinchas was the son of Elazar, was the son of Aaron HaKohen, was the son of Aaron, who was known as the Ohev Shalom Verodev Shalom, the one who loved peace and the one who ran after peace. And I think the reason why the Torah is pointing this out is to tell you that when Pinchas was performing this act, it was not because he was by nature a violent person. On the contrary, he was by nature a peaceful person. He was the grandson and a student of Aaron HaKohen. He was a student of this man of peace, and he himself also was a man of peace. However, Pinchas understood that sometimes even peace requires a person to step up, to step beyond their comfort zone, and to do something violent for the sake of Hashem. And Hashem expects us to do what is necessary in the present situation, whether it is something which is in our nature or something that is against our nature. See, someone might say that for Pinchas to do this act, he must have been a violent person. But the Torah is telling us on the contrary. He was a man of peace. And the greatness of Pinchas was that even though he was a man of peace, he was still able to go beyond his comfort zone, to do something which was totally against his nature, but he was able to do that for the sake of Hashem. And that's what Hashem expects of us. Sometimes we could do things which are in our comfort zone for the sake of Hashem. And often we find that the way we can contribute towards the Jewish people, the way we can serve Hashem, is by doing things that are within our nature. If we're naturally a kind person, there's all sorts of acts of kindness that we could perform to serve Hashem. If we're naturally a person who's just a person who's a get up and a doer and likes to get out there and accomplish things, so each midah, each attribute that we have, we can use to serve Hashem. And most of the time, that'll be our contribution. But the Torah teaching us a very important lesson from Pinchas, and that is that there are times where Hashem demands from us that we go beyond our comfort zone. We do things that are completely against our nature, and we do those things for Hashem as well. I once heard a very beautiful idea, and that is, if you want to know where you serve the Jewish people, then look at your strengths, because that'll be the area where you can contribute. But if you want to know where your own personal growth is going to come from, then look at your weaknesses. Because Hashem gives every person weaknesses. Hashem gives every person areas where they're not comfortable. But that's the area where we can step up and we can say that even though this is completely against our nature, even so we're going to serve Hashem. That brings true greatness. We find a similar concept by Avram Avinu, just in the reverse, that Avram Avinu was a person who was also a kind person, and the Torah says that after he was willing to perform the Akedas Yitzchak, after he was willing to perform the binding of Isaac, he was willing to sacrifice his son. Hashem said, "Now I know that you're a God-fearing person." What do you mean? Avram Avinu had dedicated his whole life to serving Hashem. He had dedicated his whole life to spreading Hashem's name throughout the whole world. And only now do you understand that he's a God-fearing person? And the answer is because everything that Avram Avinu did until now, he was all within his comfort zone. This was all where things that he liked to do. He was an ish chesed, he was a person of kindness, and therefore he used his kindness to serve Hashem, which was an amazing thing. But it was only when he was willing to go completely against his nature. He was willing to do something which went against everything that he stood for. He was willing to even perform an act of violence for Hashem, that Hashem said, now you've reached your full potential. Now you've shown me that it's not just that you're serving me because it's something that's comfortable and easy for you. You're serving me purely because you fear me, purely because you want to serve Hashem. So let's strive to be like Pinchas. Let's strive to be like Avraham. Obviously, we're going to serve Hashem with our strengths, and we're going to do things within our comfort zone, and we're going to use that to contribute towards the Jewish people. We're going to use that to serve Hashem. But let's not limit it to that. Let's also serve Hashem even when it's difficult for us, even when it's hard for us, and even when it goes against our nature. Because that will show Hashem that we're truly Avdei Hashem, that we're truly God-fearing people, and that we want to serve Him with everything that we do. Have a great, great Shabbos.